Good morning. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled March 24th Public Planning Committee to order. Krista, are we in compliance?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir, I will. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mrs. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes, here.
Mr. Ames?
Here.
All present, sir.
Thank you. And I'd also like to recognize that the mayor was here just a second ago. There he is over there. And also alternate Tom Lennox. Thank you for joining us. Approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Move adoption is written.
Is there a second? Second. All those signify by raising your right hand, please. Thank you very much. It approves unanimously. Approval of, I beg your pardon, appearance by citizens. It's my understanding that there are no citizens who signed up for a general comment, but you may have comments after the discussion. Krista, is that copacetic with you?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you very much. Therefore, unfinished business, consideration of a proposed ordinance 2022-06, amending Title 10 of the Municipal Code of the Town of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina by adding Chapter 2 entitled Short-Term Rentals. I'd like to make just a couple of comments before we get started, Ann. I've been on council for 6 years now, and I have not observed or experienced the level of diligence and exhaustive research that staff has done leading up to today. I'd also like to say that I'm not sure that I've ever been a part of a ordinance amendment that has generated as much public input over as long a period of time. I think that's fantastic, but as we hone in on language that we want to pass on to council, I'm reminded that this is a challenge, and probably we are not satisfying anyone to 100%. And I think that recognizes that in some cases, and in many cases on this ordinance, that there are diametrically opposed interests. And the challenge for our council is to balance the community good for the interest against the interest of individuals and the business economy. So I'm not underestimating at all the complexity and the challenge of drafting an ordinance that deals with all those situations. But I do want to again thank the public for its involvement up to this point, and also staff for their unbelievable effort to bring us to this point. Ann, please.
I'll second those comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Good morning. For the record, Ann Siren, Interim Community Planning Manager. I'm happy to be with you this morning, and thank everyone for attending. This is, as Mr. Ames said, an update as part of our short-term rental initiative. This morning, I will review the two recommendations we have before the committee. We'll review the project purpose statement and timeline, and the revised draft ordinance. We'll review the effective date and implementation of the ordinance, a proposed permit fee and other communities' permit fees. I have an example of a complaint portal and a complaint tracking system. And then we'll consider the first recommendation once we've discussed all that. Then we have the other issues of concern, which we've consolidated into two areas of focus. Included in your packet is a preliminary framework for that first area of focus, and we'll consider the second recommendation, which is your response to that first area of focus in that framework. Then I'll review the preliminary plan for the second area of focus and the next steps in the project. We'll start by taking a look at the two recommendations that will be before you this morning. The first, that Town Council review and approve a draft ordinance to establish performance standards for short-term rentals. And the second, that the committee support the preliminary framework for the examination of high occupancy short-term rentals and high floor area ratio single-family homes. Our project purpose statement has guided the project so far. We are in the midst of the project. This is not the end of this project. But as a resort area, we have numerous short-term rentals, and they contribute significantly to our economy. We all understand the importance of the hospitality economy to our island. But the lack of an ordinance has led to an imbalance between residential and resort districts and the elimination of some of those long-term single-family neighborhoods that give our island character and provide a place for our residents to live. So we have proposed to craft the short-term rental ordinance to develop a fair, predictable, and balanced approach to manage those impacts on our neighborhoods, economy, housing stock, public facilities, and the quality of life of our residents and the experience of our visitors. So again, we are in the midst of our project, not at the end, but this shows the initial project path. This includes the ordinance that you're looking at today. You see here we're at program adoption phase, which includes adopting the proposed ordinance, creating an implementation plan, issuing a request for proposals for software, developing a communication plan, all of which I'll discuss later. So to start with our first recommendation, that Town Council review and approve a draft ordinance to establish performance standards for short-term rentals. And I want to note from the start, before we review the draft ordinance, that Curtis Coltrane, the town attorney, has reviewed the draft ordinance as presented in your packet and has approved it and is comfortable with its legal viability. So in reviewing the revised draft ordinance, I'd like to give you a summary of the revisions that were presented to you and recommended by you on March 9th, followed by a summary of the town attorney's revisions to the ordinance. And then I have each section of the draft ordinance in the presentation, some of which you might want to spend more time or less. Just please let me know, and we have a lot to go through today. I don't want to slow you down. Okay. These are the changes that were presented to you and recommended by the committee on March 9th. That includes removing the requirement to post a sign with contact information on each property. We removed that because we are planning on, as I mentioned, issuing a contract with a software company that will provide a hotline for complaints. So folks will have a single point of contact if they have a complaint about a short-term rental, so we don't feel the need to have that sign.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
Ann,
ma'am.
Are we asking questions or making comments going through? How would you prefer?
I would prefer to have the presentation and then ask the questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
The second is to replace the requirement to either install a fence or a pool alarm with the requirement to notify prospective renters of the available pool safety prior to booking their rentals. Similarly, to add a requirement to notify renters of the maximum number of vehicles allowed to be parked on site before they book, so they can make that choice for themselves and ensure that they can meet that requirement. We've removed the requirement for parking passes and clarified that there is no off-site parking allowed for short-term rentals. All vehicles associated with that rental have to park on-site. The town attorney revised the draft ordinance that you reviewed on March 9th. The revised version in your packet is the final version approved by him. Those changes included revising the definitions, specifying the procedures related to short-term rental permits, adding language regarding licenses, permits, fees, and taxes, adding language regarding violations, and adding specifications about violations and the process for the suspension, revocation of short-term rental permits in the appeals process. And as we go through the sections, I want to mention that in the packet presentation, in the information in your packet, didn't include the sections of the municipal code that are referenced in the ordinance. Those are included in my presentation, and the updated presentation will be available online for everyone. And I apologize for the omission. If I send you something in the future, or if staff sends you something in the future, it'll include those so you don't have to dig through the municipal code and find those. Starting with definitions, we have definitions for owner, person who owns the property, short-term lessee, the person occupying it for 30 days or less, short-term rental, a property that's used for short-term rental, a short-term rental agent, someone authorized to act on the owner's behalf, connected with a short-term rental property, and the short-term rental permit. And that's our requirement for an annual permit that the owner must obtain. That's for each property that they are renting if they own multiple properties. And short-term rental property itself, which is a residential property located in town limits that is offered in whole and part for less than 30 days. Moving on to the permit requirements. Okay. Any owner who offers a short-term rental property must first obtain a permit. That permit is valid for an entire calendar year from January 1st to December 31st, or a fraction thereof. So if you apply for a permit on October 1st, that is an annual permit, you won't have a prorated permit fee. That'll be for the remainder of that calendar year. And a permit is required for each property that you rent, or that you offer for rent. The permits are non-transferable. The contact information be updated, but they can only be used by that property owner and for that property. And it's the duty of the owner to notify the town of any changes to the contact information related to that permit. The application fee will be set each year by town council in the annual budget ordinance. And I want to note that, particularly because the packet information includes a proposed fee. That's, if you vote on the ordinance today, you're not voting on the fee, you're voting on the ordinance. The fee will be set later by town council as part of the budget ordinance. So that can be adjusted year to year. And I'll speak more about the fee later. The application will be made available and online. And review of the application will be granted unless you fail to meet the requirements of the ordinance or any other town ordinance or relevant state or federal law. There is a section, license, permits, payments, and fees and taxes, which states you need to obtain a valid and current short-term rental permit and a business license prior to operating a short-term rental. And you need to pay all applicable fees and taxes associated with that to operate your short-term rental. Okay. Moving into general regulations for short-term rentals, starting with the fact that the owner or their agent should be available to respond to a complaint or matter related to the operation or behavior of any lessee, and that they should be available by telephone at all times during the short-term rental period and capable of being physically present at the property or taking other responsive action within an hour of notification. And I know we received quite a bit of comments and concern about that requirement. I just want to make a clarification, or a few clarifications. First, every complaint does not require the owner to, or the agent to respond to the property. The ordinance states that they have to make some sort of response. So if we receive a complaint, the owner or the agent needs to reach out to the complainant, to the lessee and notify them of the complaint, some sort of responsive action. Now, if that responsive action isn't something, for example, if there is a, let's say, a concern about trash that comes in, and the owner isn't able to resolve that violation within an hour, that's not a violation of the ordinance. If the owner contacts the lessee and says, when you get back to your unit, you're out on the beach today, when you get back to your unit, make sure that you pull in the trash cans, or whatever the issue is. As long as the owner is making an attempt to notify the renter of the violation within an hour of receiving the complaint, they're in compliance with the ordinance. Ideally, most violations will be resolved between the complainant, the owner, and the lessee, and the town wouldn't be involved. Now, because the town has the portal that takes the complaints, we'll have a record of that. We'll have a notification that it was resolved. We'll see that, but that would result in any further town code enforcement action. The fact that you have a complaint come in, that it was resolved, that's not subject to a violation. The only violation would be if the owner doesn't respond at all to a complaint. That would be subject to the town following up, further investigating the complaint. Is the complaint valid? What was the nature of the complaint? Was there a reason the owner didn't respond? And if there's a entire lack of response by the owner or agent or attempt to resolve that issue, that would be subject to further code enforcement action, including a violation. And just to be clear, the there were a lot of questions about what a violation means. So if someone is issued a citation, and that includes renters or owners, the initial appearance of the citation is required within 30 days. It's similar to a traffic ticket. You need to respond to that citation. You can say, I'm guilty or not guilty. You're judged by the court based on the evidence. And then you're either convicted or found to be not guilty. Okay. So moving on to other regulations. The owner or agent's contact information needs to be displayed in the unit so that if the guest has a concern, they can get in touch with the person responsible. Regarding safety requirements, there should be fully operable, smoking carbon monoxide detectors in each unit and a fire extinguisher. And there should be unobstructed escape routes from the unit. And just regarding safety, I would just want to mention there was a question about inspections. And we'll look at in the fee table that's in your packet, you can see some communities require an annual inspection of the units. And when staff initially discussed this, we discussed with the Bureau of Fire Prevention and the Fire Rescue Department what the idea of annual inspections. Currently, they don't have the capacity to inspect, let's say, approximately 10,000 units on an annual basis. We discussed it. Most of the regulations and the kind of the tack that we've taken in recommendations is that the owner verifies that they are meeting the requirements. So that's similar to the owner verifying that they will notify guests of the total number of parking spaces. The owner will verify that they will notify prospective renters that they are meeting safety or what safety equipment is available. So that's in line with what the town is recommending. Most communities, from what I've seen in my research, require an affidavit, not an inspection. Some communities do require an inspection. If there is direction from the committee and consensus from the committee that you would like us to research what resources would be required for annual inspections of short-term rentals, we'd be happy to do that research and present that number to you. And that would be included in the fee requirement that's in part of the budget ordinance. Point G here, I just want to note, previously, and I mentioned that previously we said that there needs to be either a fence or a screen enclosure or a pool alarm for swimming pools or hot tubs that are available to renters. What we instead are requiring is that the owner notify prospective renters of the safety equipment that's available. The one modification we might want to consider is to add the words in writing, shall notify in writing all prospective short-term lessees of the existence of any swimming pool or hot tub. We can also include that language in the actual permit that folks submit. I think would be equally as valid, but that's up to the determination of the committee and for your consideration. Okay, moving on to noise regulations. So the owner or agent shall display information about the town's codes in the unit, stating that it's unlawful to unreasonably disturb the peace and quiet of those in their homes, and that there are quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And also that the owner or agent shall communicate in writing those provisions to the lessee prior to the booking, so that folks are notified that the town has expectations for the benefit of residents and other guests, that there should be peace and quiet during the nighttime. I wanted to note that I think the town is considering, and as part of the educational materials, and certainly for enforcement, notifying owners and agents of products that are available that may be helpful in complying with these requirements. There's a company called Noise Aware, which is similar, I think, to kind of an Alexa type product that monitors noise levels. You can have it inside the rental or outside the rental, and you can measure decibel levels. And if it reaches a certain decibel, the owner would be notified. The owner then can contact the renter and say, it sounds like you're kind of having a party in the house. What's the situation? There are other communities, I think, that are, one community in Florida that is requiring that. I would not suggest that we require that. But there's another community, Big Bear, California, that offers a discount on the short-term rental permit fee if folks use that product. Now, both of these are very new. The products are new themselves, and those, the discount is a new program. So staff would want to investigate that to see if it's successful, to see how that's administered before making a recommendation about that in the future. But that wouldn't be a requirement. But more to the point, in enforcement, if there is an issue where owners are having trouble keeping, having repeated guests who are noisy, code enforcement can mention, are you aware of these products? We've talked to these folks. We wouldn't recommend a specific product, but we would make them aware of the product because they are fairly new. Okay. Moving on to trash regulations. The owner and the agent has to maintain a designated trash storage area that is fenced or screened from view of public streets in the property. And they have to display instructions for trash disposal so that folks know here's where you put your trash, the pickup times, make sure that they bring the trash cans in after they've been emptied, and make sure they're secure from pests. Regarding parking regulations, an important note is that a lot of short-term rentals on the island are located in communities that offer 24-hour private security personnel that are available to resolve parking complaints and violations. For those properties, the following standards are not applicable. Okay. On their application form, so the owner, when they apply for a short-term rental permit, would indicate the address of the property and whether they're located in one of those communities. If not located in one of those communities, they would indicate the number of vehicles allowed to be parked on the premises. And that's based on the number of improved parking spaces that they have that meet LMO standards. One of the questions that we have is what's to prevent someone from paving their entire front yard and just having a parking lot effectively in their house? Well, we still have LMO requirements for pervious and impervious surfaces and buffers. Whether you're in an overlay district or not, that will limit to some extent the amount of parking that you can put on a site. Now, some folks may put parking in an area that other folks may not agree with, but that's also true for owner-occupied properties. In any case, all of the requirements of the LMO are required to be met, and that's noted in this section of the ordinance. The owner must notify all prospective renters of the maximum number of vehicles permitted on the property before they rent. So hopefully this will eliminate the confusion of folks showing up with 2 extra vehicles that there's no room for. And again, we removed the requirement for a parking pass system, but we did eliminate or specify that all vehicles must be parked on site. You can't have any off-site parking for the short-term rental. Additional regulations include the requirement to display any town-provided outreach awareness materials related to the town requirements. This will include educational materials, so not just materials about the regulations, but welcome to the island. Are you aware of sea turtles, lights out for sea turtles, any kind of additional information that we want to have that's not just welcoming, not just about requirements, but also welcoming. And we'll provide that in a variety of options. Some folks expressed a desire to have a booklet with all of the materials in one place. We'll provide as many products as we can to provide options for folks. And point B, the property must be maintained and inspected to ensure continued compliance with all of these regulations. None of these regulations would override private covenants that are applicable to those properties. Okay. Regarding violations, it's a violation of the ordinance to lease or advertise a property for short-term rental without first complying with the requirements of the chapter, which includes obtaining a short-term rental permit and a business license and all the other regulations. And it's a violation to fail to comply with any requirement of the chapter. And violations of the chapter are subject to those sections of the Municipal Code, which I'll review just now. Okay. Municipal Code Section 1510 regards to general penalties, which states what the fine is for a violation of the ordinance, which is not to exceed $500. or imprisonment, which we would not pursue. We would pursue a fine. Further in this code, there is an additional penalty imposed for violation. The town should have the right to pursue any legal remedy available to correct it. And each day the violation occurs will constitute a separate offense. This section is, and again, these are existing sections in the municipal code. They're just referenced in the proposed ordinance. So this section is in the previous section of the municipal code regarding business licenses. So suspension or revocation of business licenses. So the business license could be suspended or revoked if the official determines the license has been mistakenly or properly issued, if the licensee has breached any condition upon which the license was issued or failed to comply with the provisions of the chapter. It was obtained through fraud, misrepresentation, evasion, or suppression. The licensee has been convicted within the previous 10 years of an offense under a law or ordinance regulating business, a crime involving dishonest conduct or moral turpitude related to a business or subject of a business, or an unlawful sale of merchandise or prohibited goods. And a licensee is engaged in an unlawful activity or nuisance related to the business, or they're delinquent in their payments to the municipality of any tax or fee. Again, we would give written notice to the licensee or person in control of the business or the short-term rental in this case by mail, notifying them that they are in violation and work with them to ensure compliance with the ordinance before moving forward with any penalties. If a business license is suspended or revoked, and this is repeated in the draft ordinance we'll see later, it shall state the time and place at which a hearing is to be held and contain a brief statement of the reasons why the business license is being suspended or revoked and a copy of this chapter. Okay. An additional section of the municipal code that's referenced in the proposed ordinance is 9.1.111. It's unlawful to do any act which offends, endangers, injures, or impairs the health, safety, life of any individual. And that any such act is hereby declared a nuisance. So to clarify, that's the definition of a nuisance. Returning back to the draft ordinance, the suspension, revocation of the short-term rental permit, this mirrors, you'll see some of the language that we just saw. The short-term rental permit was mistakenly or properly issued. The owner breached a condition of the short-term rental permit. It was obtained through fraud, misrepresentation, a false or misleading statement. The owner is delinquent in payment of any taxes or fees. The operation has been declared a nuisance, and again, we just heard the definition of a nuisance. And the owner has been convicted of 2 or more violations of this chapter in a 12-month period. So that would lead to the suspension or revocation of a short-term rental permit if determined by town staff and town council. So in that case, the town would give written notice to the owner that the permit is suspended or may be revoked pending a hearing before town council. The written notice shall state the time and place of the location of the hearing. And the written notice should be delivered to the owner by certified mail, return receipt. And it's delivered when that return receipt is signed for by the owner or their agent. Regarding the hearing will be held by town council within 30 days after the delivery of that notice. It would be held during a regular or special meeting of council. And at the hearing, the parties shall have the right to be represented by counsel, to present testimony and evidence, and to cross-examine witnesses. The rules of evidence and procedure prescribed by town council shall govern the hearing. And following that hearing, town council, by majority vote, shall render a decision setting out its findings of fact and conclusions. And that's the final decision of town council, that single hearing before council on the revocation of a business license. And that written notice is delivered to the owner. And that can be appealed in the same way that appeals are made from other decisions, and that's to circuit court. If there are any questions about that, Curtis or Josh would be happy to describe that process for you. Okay. The effective date and implementation. The effective date of the ordinance is January 1st, 2023. So that gives staff enough time to develop an implementation plan to enact the ordinance. That includes requesting funding in the budget for fiscal year 2023, which I mentioned. That includes the permit fee. Creating contracts with service providers, installing and testing a software package, and executing a communication, code enforcement, and education plan. That also gives owners and agents a runway to comply with the ordinance, to make sure that if they own a unit, that all of the requirements of the ordinance have met, and it gives us time to educate owners about what those requirements are. Regarding the proposed permit fee, we recommend a $250 annual fee for short-term rental permits. And staff in finance and the legal department have researched and are confident that this fee will cover all of the costs associated with identifying short-term rental properties, collecting data on their locations and trends over time, which will provide us further information for the second part of the initiative, which I'll describe later. Ensuring compliance with permitting and business license requirements and tax remittance, and receiving, recording, and resolving violations. So in a practical sense, we're looking to make sure that we have sufficient staff on the registration portion. We've got 10,000 properties. We've got some folks who are less comfortable with computers than others. So we need to be sure that they have enough services to understand that a permit is required, how they comply with the permit to make sure that they don't have incomplete information. We'll have the software related to this, and then on the enforcement end, additional code enforcement officers to resolve any issues that come up. So we've done a good amount of research on this. Again, we feel that fee will cover all the costs associated with that. It may vary very slightly from year to year with inflation or things like that, but that annual fee, again, will be set each year by town council during the budget process based on advice by staff. And again, if you by advice of the committee, if you want to move forward with annual inspections of each of the short-term rental permits, we can do additional research and provide what the cost associated with that would be and present that to you as part of that budget request. Looking at other communities' permit fees, you can see most of them are valid for a year. We looked at communities regionally and a few nationally. There's some variation, but the average for the short-term rental permit fee is $245. So we're just slightly above average for these other communities. Okay. In your packet, there was an example of a complaint portal, which I can bring up and run through if you're interested. I know that we've been talking for quite some time. I'd be happy to go through that or skip ahead.
Let's wait on that.
Yes, sir. And there's a complaint tracking system that we would have. Attachment E in your meeting packet shows what that would look like on the town side and all the information that we recorded, date and time of the information recording of the call, address of the subject property, category of the complaint. All that information would be available to the town and recorded over time so that we know, if there's an issue with a property, we'll have a record of that. We'll have all the information available. We can also make sure that complaints are valid, that people aren't using the system to harass their neighbors or a certain property owner. We can also put that information on a map for you so that you can look at it and see where the heat maps of violations. That part of the software package also includes, as I mentioned, just tracking where short-term rentals are over time, their location, so that we can make some decisions about phase 2. So there you can see a visual what that system looks like, which is in your packet. Okay. Are there any questions that I can answer for you about the first recommendation?
I'm sure there are. Glenn, would you like to lead off?
Sure. First, thank you, Ann, for an outstanding job in leading this team and getting us to this point. It's clear to me that there's been a great deal of research that's been undertaken by the town staff, studying the ordinances of other communities, the successes and failures of those other communities. And I think that we are now to the point where we need to bring something forward. I don't think that this will be the final iteration of this over time. I suspect after a year or two, we will learn that we need to do more things or do things a little bit differently. One of the concerns that we've heard from the management companies has to do with, quote, ensuring that people are aware of the various regulations and so forth. And I have a suggestion that could be implemented after this meeting today and brought forward as part of the full council, and that is that we create a form that would be used as an addendum to any lease agreement, and that form would list the various requirements of the ordinance having to do with disclosures, pool safety equipment, parking regulations, et cetera. But then in order to, quote, ensure that people are aware of it, we could require that the tenant actually sign that form saying, I have read this, I understand these regulations. That may gain some more teeth in this for our benefit. But I do not want to delay the process of this moving forward. I think we need some clarification on what response within 1 hour means. You've stated that that doesn't mean that the agent or the owner, as the case may be, has to appear on the site, but fill that in for us a little bit so we can understand that better.
Sure. The systems that are set up, the portal and the hotline, when they receive a complaint, what happens is the operator of the third-party contractor contacts by phone, by text, or by call the owner or agent that's listed on the short-term rental permit.
Okay.
They notify them there is a complaint, the nature of the complaint, and at that point, the owner is responsible or the agent is responsible for contacting the guest or renter and saying, this is the issue, and that can be by text or by phone. This is the issue, it needs to be resolved. Now, the expectation is that the contact will happen within an hour of receiving that call. There may be some systems in place. Folks may want to put some backup systems in place in case they're an owner in charge of responding. They don't want to hire a property management company. I was just looking at a form today where there are multiple contacts. There are backup contacts. So if you're traveling between these dates, you can have someone else respond within an hour to the complaint. So there are options for folks. We realize that especially a physical response, during summer traffic, or for a property management company that has only so many employees, it may not be feasible to have a physical response within an hour. But that's the expectation. Now, it may not be met every time, and we're certainly not advocating that code enforcement write a citation or a violation that each time that hour is not met, but that is the expectation.
I understand what the expectations are, but I also read the ordinance, and it appears to require the availability within an hour. And what you're saying is that, no, the owner or agent doesn't necessarily have to appear in an hour, but we haven't come up with what the conditions are that would require appearance within an hour, or what the preliminary steps might be that a tenant, that an owner or a manager might use short of having a physical appearance. So I think we need to come up, I know that it's clear in your mind, but to a third party, to someone else, it may not be so clear, and we get down to a literal reading of the ordinance.
Sure.
It appears to come closer to requiring that. The complaint portal that you're referring to, that's a piece of software, as I understand it. And explain to us again a little bit how that works.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I have an example here. This is, hopefully this will go through for me. This is Summit County, Colorado. So as part of their, you can see part of their short-term rental page, this is specifically a page about complaints. We won't necessarily use this type of system or the software provider that they use, but I think they have a pretty robust system. So they have a complaint hotline, which is staffed 24/7 by the contractor, And then you can also submit a complaint online. And we can include, for example, a link to this on the My HHI app, for example, to make it easy. But you pick the type of violation. So let's say it's a loud party. You would enter your location. Here we are. Okay. So if there's a unit number, if you have a multi-unit building, you know the number, you can enter it. Describe the issue. And if known, you can put the link to the listing. Oh, let's see. Oh, let's see if I can do that. If known, provide X. I apologize. Oh, there it is. You have to black it out. You can upload videos, photos, audio recordings of the violation. Enter your name and a phone number. You can decide whether it's used in court or not. If yes, there's an affidavit that you can sign legally, and then using your signature. If not, you can proceed, and they'll say thank you, and you can hit submit. And that goes into the system that we saw.
All right. I think what I'm asking is, this is all between the complaining party and the software agent, if you will. And then it also would be making contact with the tenant that is in the property at that time, is that correct?
It makes contact with the owner. It's the owner's responsibility to make contact with the lessee or the tenant.
Right. What does the town know why this is going on?
The town is notified. In this system, a record will be generated in the town system. Now, we would have access to that, and we could see, you know, this is moving forward. We had a call, caller name, caller number, reported address, reported issue. The caller requested notification, and then knows whether it was resolved. We can see all of that. We don't need to act on that. We can see the information, and we can even be notified of the information, but we don't need to do anything about the information.
So that would be our enforcement officers that
That's-
would have first contact with that?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I am very pleased about the violation and hearing requirements that have been inserted here. I think it makes it very clear what will happen, and it means that there will be a resolution of these complaints pretty quickly. And I think that is excellent, and I'm very pleased that that is there. In my view, an awful lot of this work has been created by a few bad apples, and that's most unfortunate. I am convinced that most of our rental property owners here are responsible owners. I'm convinced that most of the visitors that come here and occupy these properties are also responsible. But each member of council, including yours truly, hears complaints about this, particularly in the high summer, and we have to deal with it. And so it's unfortunate that the actions of a few have caused all of these regulations. I'd like to avoid as many regulations as I could, but it's most unfortunate that that's happened. Our responsibility is to our constituents, and our constituents are the people who live here. And those are the people that we're trying to deal with. So I think that we are making a good first effort here. To a large degree, the horse is out of the barn. We have some properties out there that never should have been there. We all know that. But those are facts that we have to live with moving forward. So in summary, thank you very much for an outstanding job. I think this is a really good first step for us, and I look forward to moving it forward and getting this in place as soon as possible. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Glenn. Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Morning.
Do we have the, I guess, most current number of STRs on the island? I know that number keeps moving. Do you have something that you can report on?
It's a moving target. I believe when I looked at it a couple of days ago, the number that we have for the service that we have includes Airbnb and VRBO. It doesn't include local companies. We will have further information on that when we get the more robust software product. I believe it was 7,600 the other day that I looked at it.
Okay.
That does not include managed properties on the island.
That's correct. Unless they're advertising on Airbnb or VRBO. And that cycles considerably. Trying to look at the numbers and give you an exact number, the more I look at the numbers, the more variation there is seasonally. We've got some folks who are live here part-time of the year who haven't, gone back north, so to speak. So it varies widely throughout the season.
Okay. Thank you for laying out the, I guess, prosecution and appeal process. That helps me. I still have one additional question there. There seems to be a difference between a business license and a permit. So I'm just curious to know if an agent has a business license and multiple permits, the trying will be simply on the permit that is in violation. So in a sense, a business could have 10 permits, one violating, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their business license would be in jeopardy. Is that correct?
I'd like Curtis to speak to that,
Okay,
answer that
sure.
question.
It would depend on how they have the whole thing set up. If they have everything managed under one business license, that could be a problem. If they have a separate business license for each separate property, then no, it would be directed to that. The short-term rental permits are property by property, though.
Okay. I guess as we move forward, and I thank Mr. Stanford for being around to help us with stuff like this, but for my layman mind, I'm confused by that because typically I would think that a property management company or a owner of multiple units having one permit per unit, there's going to be some separation between if one unit is in violation and the owner, and that may get a little muddy down the road.
As a practical matter, probably, at least my experience, and I can't tell you how people outside of my experience operate generally, but people that own multiple properties that they use in this fashion typically have them titled in the name of a different LLC or company. And so you've got a different, you'll have, for many of them, different owners anyway. But to the extent that there is a person that might get caught up in the way you've described, we can address that in the language. Obviously, we've got, this is I mean, in my view, a first cut of this, and these questions get raised, and we can see if we can find a way to address the concern in the language.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. While we're on code, I guess I'll ask this question. I also agree that as we move forward with hiring a third party, having further discussion about this, that there may be further revisions to what we adopt at the council level, right, in the next couple of weeks. I'm just curious to know how that would play out. Would it be something that would come back to subcommittee for further discussion, or would it be handled just at the council level?
Our intention or our proposal is that the ordinance as written, if the committee is comfortable with it, could be passed by town council at your next meeting on April 5th. The issues that we're talking about in terms of hiring a code writer, setting the permit fee, all of those things are administration of the ordinance that staff can handle and provide updates to the Public Planning Committee on, or to town council as we request the permit fee.
Okay.
If you wanted significant changes to the ordinance, obviously, we could come back to the Public Planning Committee, come back to you, list the ordinance, discuss them, and then once you're comfortable with that ordinance, move it back to the town council.
Okay. I just want us to be mindful that there could be an opportunity where someone shows up and says, hey, you didn't get this right, you need to change it. I want to make sure that we circle back in the same fashion that we have gotten to this point, which is very engaging, not just with council, but the community. I think that's important. I do have, I think I have a response to your question about the inspections by fire and rescue or whomever as far as fire extinguisher is concerned. But before I answer that, I think I need to make these comments about the proposed fee. And I understand that we have to have this ordinance in place in order to build a budget around it. But I go back to our problem statement, or purpose statement, I should say, where we're trying to develop a fair, predictable, and balanced approach to manage short-term rental impacts on our neighborhoods, economy, housing stock, public facilities, and quality of life for our residents. The fee can't be viewed as simply a deter for bad apples, so to speak, okay? I just don't see it that way, all right? And I also don't see it simply covering the cost of the softwares and the third parties that we're going to have to engage with in order to manage what we're putting in place, okay? I'm really referring back to the imbalance, all right? I'll just use this example, particularly for those that are going to be developing budget. You know, we know for certain that we don't want our entire island to become short-term rentals, okay? And we know we've had some infiltration in areas that we can argue that it may or may not have been. But we also realize that we have a huge burden on our quality of experience on Hilton Head because of our lack of affordable housing, right? So to me, this fee should really be leaning towards fixing the imbalance and not just covering the cost of managing it, okay? That, to me, makes it more equitable. I kind of view this fee at the moment as being somewhat inequitable because there are a lot of areas on Hilton Head that may have a lot of units that bring in a lot of money, and there may be units that don't bring in as much money. But if we're truly trying to correct the issue at hand of imbalance, I think we need to get out of the box with that proposed fee and make sense of how we get back to something that is more in balance, okay? So those are my thoughts on that. And with that being said, we're talking about, I don't know, 8,000, 9,000 units that we want to inspect on an annual basis. That's a lot of units to try to inspect. And to me, that would be a huge amount of funding that have to be associated with that. And I would rather use that funding to get back to the imbalance problem, okay? So those are my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Aaron, for the excellent work that you've done so far.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Ms. Becker?
Thank you. And thank you, Ann. I appreciate everyone's work on this matter. And I just want to remind, or maybe inform, why it is we are discussing this issue. Hilton Head Island is a paradise that draws people from around the country and around the world. It has developed as such a place where our visitors come. They have those amazing experiences that have been referred to here today, and that we all know because we've each had them coming across that bridge as we get the chills. Hopefully, we will continue to do that. And then our visitors often become our residents because of those experiences. And they look to our neighborhoods to establish their lives, raise their families, and enjoy their retirement. The situation that we find ourselves in today has grown to the extent that those conditions are no longer largely existent. Use the word elimination in that project purpose statement of our neighborhoods. And I kind of took exception of that. Although it fairly may be an elimination, but more pointedly, it is the loss of that quality of life that we sought when we purchased our homes to live here. It is that loss of community that we are able to enjoy when we interact with our neighbors and we walk down the street. Those types of losses are impacted by the type of development that has been allowed to happen on the island. So in many regards, the issues that we have been self-inflicted. It's my hope for the future, and I know that many in this room have heard me say this almost on a daily basis, and I'll continue to say it because it's a priority of mine. It is my hope in the future that our development process for homes becomes much more reasonable with the type of lifestyle and quality of life that people sought when they came to Hilton Head Island, first as visitors, perhaps in rentals in those homes, those reasonable homes where people bought them with the expectation of retiring in them, therefore using the revenue gained in the meantime to help purchase that home. I get why a short-term rental is important to our community. But what's happened over the course of time is that these homes have become out of balance with our neighborhoods. And we no longer are constructing residences that allow that scenario to take place and that growth in our residential population to continue, for new families to find homes that they can start their lives in, for new employees coming to the island to find residents to get their feet in the ground here and to enjoy what we have, not just for a short period of time, but for a lifetime. And in gaining that rebalance, I'm hoping that we look at the standards in which our communities are developed, where now we find ourselves, we're building homes that families won't be interested in purchasing. The only next buyer for that property would seemingly be another investment firm looking to make oodles of money without any connection, without any commitment to our neighborhoods, to our quality of life, and to the future of Hilton Head's paradise. The third dimension of development is that interaction of human beings that sit among the built environment that we allow. On Hilton Head, we've purposely decided a long time ago that that built environment would include trees, it would include landscape, it would include space, it would include respect for our ecology on the island, our turtles and wildlife. If we continue down the road we no longer will have those. What we will have is nothing but the interaction and the confrontation and conflict of the dynamic of a person next to a person next to a person, all fighting for the same resources. None of us, I believe, in this room or listening to this want that for Hilton Head. And so that's what brings us to the point of where we are today, so that we can try to correct that imbalance, but not by draconian measures of regulations and the like, but by reminding us why we're here and the purpose of Hilton Head for the long term and not for the short-term gain. So hopefully with those comments, you understand from my perspective why this is so important. A small matter, which I think relates to some of the comments that have been made up here, and thank you all for those, is and previously, how many rentals are there on the island? We have numbers 7,000, 10,000, et cetera. Well, when I was doing my research for today's meeting, I picked up Air DNA, and I looked at their map for Hilton Head Island, which, by the way, you can't get into without paying a fee to get further information. But it shows a map, and you won't be able to see it very clearly, and I was going to ask you to put up. This map indicates only 5,000 or so, so it's not complete. Again, I didn't pay for it. I took what was on the surface. Do you see all of those purple? That's just about half of what's being described as current. That's our entire community. The imbalance is clear, well demonstrated. And so we come to an ordinance that in my mind currently is not addressing the needs of our neighbors. The needs of our neighbors and the residents on our island is to regain that balance in their lives so that there's not, and for those who have psychology as a background may know the theory of learned helplessness. And so I'm afraid that some of our neighborhoods may be falling into a situation where they're becoming so convinced that we're not going to do something that actually impacts the disruption in their lives, that they've fallen into a learned hopelessness type of condition where they give up. Or they give up and they move. They put their houses on the market and they leave us. So in my mind, we're not really in this ordinance doing enough to address that as an immediate need. Doesn't begin this ordinance until January 1st, 2023. What happens over the course of the next year? Who do we call? Who do they call when there are issues? Even when the ordinance is in place, how does that mechanism of going on to the website, which you correctly pointed out, and they make a complaint, something that's impacting their lives right away that they need relief from, how does that get them to a solution and a resolution and back to their daily quality of life that they and we expect? I think we fall short when we say we're going to use that system and we don't provide a more immediate. And so to the answer of, and the concern for the hour response time, that's why. Because people's lives are being impacted. And the reason people's lives are being impacted is because their expectations are exactly as I've discussed and you've all discussed with me. That's the important issue. That's why the hour response time is necessary and should be required. I do. So what I'm trying to drive at is I'm not prepared to pass this ordinance on today because others have mentioned that there are issues. I believe that there are greater issues that we really need to address. I believe that a recommendation to get to the point is that our agent, in terms of response time, needs to be someone who is in agreement and not only affirmed, but provides an affidavit that they will make themselves available to whatever the situation and condition is that is being complained about. And that there are, in fact, as you mentioned, and backups for that. Mr. Brown, you brought up a question about licensing and permits. That was one of my questions as well. If we look at the statute or the code that we have, 10.1.150, which is fully described in our ordinance in terms of how this procedural hearing happens, it really does refer to licenses, not necessarily permits, and therefore, are they one and the same? I'm not clear yet on that. If we are going by a license ordinance removal, that impacts every one of those permits, and not every one of those permits are necessarily the offending property. Does that make sense? So a question that I have, a suggestion, I don't know, but I would like some clarity on that. I'm going to try to go through my notes. I don't want to shortchange any of it because this group of people who are here and those listening are interested in us making sure that we are thorough in finding the mechanisms that provide that relief and do it in a way that's meaningful, not to just get through it. So I've mentioned that one. Fines. So on page 17 of your presentation, we have licenses, permits, payments of fees, taxes. Throughout the ordinance, it refers to not being able to get your permit if those types of things haven't been satisfied. Well, I would also relate that to a concern about if someone after attempts at trying to restructure behavior or to get people to come into compliance, because no one's looking to come out and slap everybody's hands. They're looking to find ways to get people to understand that the reasons for these rules are so that we can get that balance back and provide what we've discussed. Short of that happening, fines will be in place. We have it in our ordinance. But I would like to see some emphasis on the permit not being able to be renewed or continued until those fines are paid. And the mechanism for issuing those citations and tracking down the person who the citation goes to and getting them to pay that fine isn't clear to me either. And the length of time, more importantly, for that to occur isn't particularly helpful. So I'm curious as how we can shorten that length of time so that if the gentle education of how to be a better neighbor and how to better improve your relationship with the community isn't taken, that the fines will in fact be paid, and that will be the mechanism to get people into compliance. So, question on that. That responsive action, I also had a question about, others have brought it up. The responsive action, is that simply, well, I reached out and I called the sheriff or I called code, and so I've done something and my job is done. And that pretty much puts us where we are today, which is a burden on the town and a burden on our sheriff's department. So I'm going to pick up on, I'm trying to be short, but I don't want to be too short. I'm going to pick up on the fee issue with regard to inspections. The reason that, and I read, by the way, for anyone who's interested, I read all of your comments. I understand what you've written, and I've heard comments that it would be unreasonable for people to have to ensure that, for instance, exits aren't blocked for fire. I can only shake my head. And because I read comments like that, I think it would be wise of us to find out from Fire and Rescue what it would take for them, their costs, their overhead, their manpower, whatever that is, to have inspections that are specific to those concerns about the health and welfare of our community and our visitors and our guests. If you have someone to your home, just as a day-to-day happenstance, you automatically ensure that they're going to be safe, that they're going to be well protected. And I don't think it should be any less in these instances. And because the homeowner isn't present on property, there needs to be some assurance and ensure that the proper alarm system is in place. For those who don't know, I speak very sensitively about the issue of fire. My house was on fire in the middle of the night. I know what it takes to get out of your house when you know your house well. If you are in a rental and you've just arrived and your kids are in one bedroom and your pets are in another space and Grammy and Papa who came along with you are in another space and you need to get out, you need to have information there available to you. And I would like, as a matter of feeling confident that our community is safe and our visitors are safe, that they have that information at their forefront, right in front of them. So I want Fire and Rescue and a fee, what that would entail, manpower, et cetera. I would like to know more about that. If a fire is coming up the back of your house and the smoke is filling from the other direction and the only way out is either of those or to jump, you need to know what your best choice is, right? And if you don't know your environment, you can't possibly be aware of that. So I think it behooves us to make sure that people are safe and will survive something that happens and you oftentimes have no idea why. The page 25 of your presentation, it has to do with the parking. To me, it just needs to be cleaned up the way it's written. I appreciate your addressing the issue with the concerns that people could just pave over their yards for additional parking spaces. I see that the applicable requirements of the LML code is listed here. I asked for those codes to be outlined because to me, it seemed as though if I was picking up an ordinance and wanted to know what I was going to be responsible for, what the repercussions to me are if I'm not responsible, And I would want to have as much information in front of me in as easy to read manner as humanly possible, because I too am a layman. And I think that other people might appreciate that as well. So I've been assured that our LMO code will prevent that type of paving over more of our paradise. So page 27 says short-term properties must be properly maintained and inspected by the short-term rental. And my question is, and if they're not? We've talked about the piece of it. The operator of a short-term rental has been declared a nuisance. And so I understand the code with regard to nuisance. That answers my question as to what triggers this. And an owner has been convicted of more than 2 violations of this chapter in a 12-month period. So I guess we mean 3 or more. And then I start getting wishy-washy on some of the things, because we go from shall, everyone shall, which we all know the meaning of, to may. And that's where I start to feel as though things may fall apart for the future. You shall do this, but if you don't do it, we may do this, we may not. We're not sure. And there's just a lot of ambiguity for me in that. And if the goal is here to try to get people to understand, we really are asking, pleading, and helping to educate people to come back into compliance for a more balance between our visitors, who we hope someday will have the experiences to want to become our residents, and not the experience of being miserable when they're here because we have onerous rules. So that's the goal. So anyway, the maze and the, we want you, you shall do this, we're insisting you do this, but if you don't, I'm not really sure, we may do this, we may not do that, is a little unsettling for me. So for those reasons, and probably 12 or 15 more that you don't want me to go into at this moment, but I will.
No, thank you.
I am going to just let you know that I likely will be asking for more time to review this, to get it further refined, to incorporate perhaps some of what Glenn and Alex have asked for as well.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. My thoughts. We've used the word balance a couple of times today. I use diametrically opposed. A balance that I'm aware of is the quality of experience for visitors and the quality of life for residents. And that's one balance we're dealing with here. But another perhaps that gets to emotionally what that's all about is the balance between the mindset of fun-loving vacationers. We are, after all, a hospitality-driven community. I immediately go back to the way Charles Frazier saw the vacation experience. And so I think it's very important for us to keep that in mind, but then you have the impacts of those activities on people who live here 365 days of the year. And that's another balancing act that we are trying to achieve. There's the issue of the economy, which is great, but there's also the core values of this community, which need to be preserved. So I can't overemphasize how difficult coming up with words to achieve that balance for the betterment of our community. But I'll try. I'm not yet satisfied, Anne, that a parking sentence preserves a core value of environment, of protection of landscape, trees, minimizing the impact of impervious coverage. So I'm willing to move forward the way it is drafted at this moment, but I would like, in the intervening time, for staff to make me and perhaps the four of us more comfortable that language isn't too open-ended or creates an issue that we will regret down the road. Now, that gets me to a question to our lawyers, and that is, can we pass the ordinance as drafted today, but with language that would allow the full council to amend the motion at full council for a variety of things?
Well, first, y'all aren't passing anything today.
No,
You
we're
are-
recommending.
you're
I
making
understand
a
that.
recommendation
Yes.
to council, to the text of this ordinance, and obviously, when it comes before council, council can change it as council deems appropriate.
Okay. I'm going to, that satisfies me, because I think it's important for this committee to move this forward to full council and have that debate. Annual inspection. I don't support an annual inspection at this time. I think we should first go with the language of the ordinance. And if we begin to see that relying on affidavits by owners is inadequate, then we can take it to the next step. That's where my head comes out. A recommendation was made to add permit numbers on any advertising that goes out. So if I look at a website and I see some property being advertised, there's a permit number there. I feel more confident then that we've closed the loop and perhaps made it easier for people to pursue issues that need to be pursued. You mentioned adding in writing to the pool, and I think that makes sense as well. Glenn mentioned the 80-20 rule, and that's really unfortunate. It really is also where we are. So much of this language recognizes that 20% don't use common sense, aren't considerate of their neighbors. There's a difference in attitude from one owner to the next, and perhaps even a professional difference between one management company and another. So I think what this ordinance is trying to do is raise the standard across the board. So Glenn mentioned proposed a form. I would support that staff look into that, and full council can make its decision when we review this at the next meeting. I understand the purpose of an hour response time. I have to say I'm a little uncomfortable where the language is today, but I don't know what the solution is there, because we have property owners, full-time residents, and perhaps sometimes even visitors, who are unable to sleep or who have to clean up trash or whatever. And so I think that this ordinance, to be successful, has to have some teeth in it. And this is one place where I think it's appropriate. But I'll also add, after having said that, that any enforcement personnel, any policeman, any person who is making a judgment on somebody else has to use discretion, and every circumstance is different. And there's no way that in this ordinance we're going to be able to use language that anticipates all those different examples. So I support the 1 hour to move it forward. I think Alex brought up a very important point when he connected the impacts of short-term rentals to the demand that we have and perhaps the inadequate supply we have of well-trained employees on the island. And so at some point, we have to start solving that problem. And I'm willing to explore what that might mean in terms of this fee. Tammy mentioned core values. And I really think that hits the crux of our challenge here, because so many of these short-term rentals have become just a capital asset, an investment tool with almost no knowledge, again, 80-20% rule, almost no knowledge or care of what makes this town tick or what the foundation is on which it was built. And so I think, again, the complexity of the balancing act that we're trying to achieve here can't be underestimated or overestimated. So I'm prepared to vote this forward today and acknowledge that some things aren't perfect, but in the next intervening 2 weeks, staff, lawyers will provide us a response to the concerns that were raised today. Ann, would you like to? And then I'd like to ask for public comments.
Yes, sir. Would you like me to continue on to
No,
the second
I want
recommendation
to
or
deal
vote of
with
comments?
this issue first.
Okay.
Now, under normal Robert's Rules of Order, we would make the motion at this time and then invite public comments. Is there a motion to move this forward?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the Public Planning Committee recommend adoption of the ordinance to the full town council, subject to such revisions by the town council as may be agreed upon at the time of that hearing.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Krista, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
No. I'm going to pass. I'm very sorry. You're absolutely right. My mistake. I apologize. All right. We have a motion on the floor and a second. Public comments. Mr. Daly.
David, I would like for each member of the public to identify whether or not they are a resident and whether or not they are the owner of a short-term rental and whether or not they are representing a management company.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
10-2.
10-2-40.
Thank you.
Might be about fire safety.
Oh, yes, thank you.
There you go.
All right.
Hi, Jack Daly. I live in Forest Beach.
And excuse me, Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt. And please, if you're addressing the council, try to speak just for 3 minutes. We have a lot of people.
Sure. Very briefly, 10-240, 5B. If you'll read that with me, short-term rental properties must be properly maintained and inspected by the owner or short-term rental agent to ensure continued compliance with this chapter and all other applicable zoning, building, and health, fire safety code requirements. Okay, when you buy a house as an investment tool, you are not bestowed with the abilities of a fire inspector, someone who knows National Electric Code, or any other fire safety person. It doesn't come with it like some kind of baronial title to a big estate. And so we're assuming, now, yes, this person is accountable. The owner is accountable, or should be accountable, should be held reliable, and he is at fault for these problems. But he doesn't understand these problems. He doesn't know if he's in good standing. So if you give him a sheet and an affidavit, all he's got to do is, as far as I know, this all looks good, and he checks it, and then you accept it, you both have plausible deniability. But like David said, you haven't moved the needle forward on safety. That's just plausible deniability. And if that's going to be the town standard, then please, Josh, when you send me my form about hospitality tax, you say, Jack, do you owe the town any money as far as you know? I'll check no. But for that, the town requires documentation and accountability. So if we're for real in this ordinance, we're trying to make things better, we need documentation and accountability. And they can hire fire safety or some other person that's qualified on the outside to come in and inspect those things yearly. Because like Glenn said, some of these horses have been out of the barn for many years in Forest Beach, and they're Frankenstein houses, and they were done with not up to code and done unsafely. And we need to find those, because it's asking for a problem. Does Tamara know that her gas line works safely or not? And we'll find out. Does an owner who lives out of state, because they're obviously renting the house out, know that everything works? That's a lot of assumption to say that someone as an investor understands every detail and the safety of that house, and is it safe? And was it constructed safely? So please, on that one, we have a wonderful fire rescue department. We can add an extra fee, and those guys on the side can make another $100 per unit going through there and looking for professional things. And so if we're going to raise the standard, let's start there with safety. I mean, safety requires accountability, not just deniability. Okay? So please, let's have the pros do that one.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Welcome, Risa.
Good morning. I'm Risa Prince. I do not own rental property. Moved here to a community that specifically does not allow short-term rentals. But I'm speaking today because I'm concerned about the unintended consequences of adopting any regulation on short-term rental. First of all, I agree with Mr. Daly. To me, there's an implied exposure to liability if the town issues a permit for a property that the town can't verify is suitable and safe for occupancy. So, for example, when someone builds a house, they get a certificate of occupancy. If the town is regulating this and charging a fee for a permit, I would think it would be wise for the town to insist that the rental property at least complies with minimum safety standards via a third-party inspection. Secondly, equitable impact is of concern. I think there's a difference between someone who owns and perhaps rents their unit as an individual owner versus an investor who comes in looking to capitalize on our market. I also have a question about how you are differentiating short-term rental units from short-term occupancy timeshare units. Just because someone owns a portion and a right to occupy a unit under timeshare, I don't see much difference in terms of the community impact of those folks coming in for their week of the year versus someone coming in on a rental basis. So I'm not sure why this wouldn't also apply to timeshares. And thirdly, every time the town adopts a policy, I have concerns about the viability of our enforcement. When we have someone like the sheriff who has said, I'm providing equitable services everywhere I'm operating, and I will not implement specific town ordinances above and beyond the county ordinances, I think that it will be imperative for the town to have its own code enforcement, and I think managing this one is going to take a lot of resources, and I just want to make sure that the town is prepared to hire sufficient people to enforce this along with our other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Risa. Others? Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is John Davidson. I probably have a longer connection to Hilton Head than anyone. As far as I know, this is my 51st year. I retired here because of COVID and became a full-time resident on the first of the year, getting all the paperwork finally finished to get a driver's license and so forth. And would not be off the golf course, except that this is probably the worst drafting and legal work that I have ever seen. I've been a lawyer, clerk for the South Carolina Supreme Court, taught in the law school in Columbia. It's a horrid embarrassment. Let me say why. If you will look at the definition of short-term occupancy, the short-term rental, paragraph F, any residential property in the municipal limits of the town of Hilton Head that in whole or part is offered for lease or occupancy under a lease or any other form of agreement for periods of less than 30 days. If my wife and I enter into an agreement with a couple from France to exchange properties for 2 weeks, somebody requires me to get a permit, go through an inspection, pay $250. If I'm an eccentric and I have goldfish and a cat, and I want to leave for a week, and I hire a college student to come and stay in my unit for a week, I have to get a permit for $250. That's how badly written this ordinance is. And that took me about 6 seconds to understand it. Now, because I'm opposed to the ordinance, I'm not going to sit here and illuminate you with what any good Philadelphia lawyer will tell you about how to get around it. Okay? Within 5 to 10 seconds, I can write a legal agreement that completely circumvents this ordinance. I won't tell you how or why, but I will only leave you with this mental impression. Let's assume I had not given up the practice of real estate law, and I'm in my office on a Friday afternoon here, and I get a call from the title company, and they have a couple with a moving van that wants to move into a new house on Sea Pines, and the wire transfer is messed up, and they can't close. Now, any real estate lawyer in the Western world would say, sign a lease. You can get them out if something goes haywire. It's simpler than tomorrow. But this agreement, because it says any agreement for occupancy under 30 days, makes that very simple, common practice to close real estate in St. Louis, Missouri when you have title problems on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock that you cannot resolve, illegal. Okay? I've got 3 minutes. I have to stop. If somebody wanted to ask me, I could probably tell you for 2 weeks the problems with this. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Are there any other public comments? Yes.
Hello. Good to see everyone again. My name is Drew Brown. I'm an Island resident, and I work in the vacation rental industry, and my company currently manages 100 units in its Island Time Hilton Head. I had prepared a speech, but I wanted to just take a minute, and you all brought up really valid points in your comments. I think that one thing that really set a tone with me as fair and predictable. We want to set up something that is fair and predictable for the future. Yet we are about to pass something out of committee and to the town council for your revisions, not public comment and revision, that will then become a law that we will all have to abide by as soon as possible, as soon as it is in play, even though it is set for January of 2023. It is a legal ordinance. I ask that you understand the impact of that, as this is our largest economic driver for our area. And when you talk about your constituents and you talk about your residents, you're looking at one. This room is full of residents. All of these people that work in this industry are residents. So don't sit there and try to tell us that it's only for a certain portion. We are all affected by this. So we ask that you understand the impact of what that will have as not only an economic driver. We talk about affordable housing. I completely agree with you. The largest landholder in the town of Hilton Head is the town of Hilton Head. Through public-private partnerships, that problem can be solved. That is not the fault of short-term rentals. We are not in a position that is our responsibility. So I ask that you truly understand, we are going to pass this out of committee. We don't know the number of rental properties on the island. We now are talking about multiple permits and licenses that increase the cost. We don't even know if my business is possibly going to be at risk if there is a violation. But this could go to council and be enacted. I ask that you understand the gravity of what that means for the impact on our entire community and its residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Are there any other public comments? Yes, ma'am.
This will sound so minuscule. I appreciate all this. Laura Holtzman, North Forest Beach, has 20 years last week, part-timer, own a house. Me and my husband, who just passed, we owned for 47 years between California, Colorado, Breckenridge, New York City, New Jersey. This developed into our business. And when we discovered, after 9/11, we found Hilton Head, even though I'm born and bred New Yorker. Best place we ever saw. We saw that we could afford it because of circumstances, but we wanted to be able to rent. What we owned in New York City, the laws changed, and we lost that. But here, y'all, I love it. This is my home. This is a free state. I don't want to see it turned into Brooklyn and New York City and Denver and Breckenridge and California. So all I'm talking about, I'm a single person, one house. We used to have two. I sold it. I've been doing it for 20 years, VRBO. I have never had a complaint. I have a list, everything you talked about. My people through VRBO get it. I've never had a neighbor tell me, and they are, if they complain, you call me, they're gone. Never in 20 years. One trash thing, I have a big trash thing about double bagging behind the fence. We don't even have to take it to the curb. And I tell them, don't, because that's part of my contract. And I have one complaint to me. I don't need you guys. Are they gonna call you, like some of the complaints that I've gotten, because we have palmetto bugs, also known as roaches in New York? Is that gonna be a complaint? I have exterminators, but we live on a swamp, for Pete's sakes. I'm on a slab. I have 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a great big backyard that we developed. And this is my income. And I pay on my 2,100, not McMansion, my 2,100 home, which is my total home now, without my husband, but I still rent. I just paid $7,100 in property tax. And the accommodation taxes, which when business is good, my customers pay. But we've had ups and downs where I paid it, we paid it. And I'm gonna find out someone's gonna call because of a loud party. This is Colorado. This is Breckenridge. We've been there. You defined a loud party. My people have to be in, but I'm not going to have some Nazi person going up the street at 10:01 to drag them in. And my neighbors know that. And with everybody in my circumstances there, I don't want McMansions. That changed when we first started coming back, and it broke my heart. And the stuff that we had to go through to remove some of those trees, whatever they were, in our backyard, which was a swamp, we need permits so we could put a pool in. I don't like that portion of it. But this is my business, my home. I pay, and we would never have been able to live here if we hadn't been able to do what we're doing. So watch out. Look what happened to Brooklyn. You start good, rent control. You ever think those departments ever get smaller with more rules and rules and rules? So that's my concern.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Hi, Council. My name's Lisa Roberts. I am all three. I'm a resident, I'm a short-term property owner, and I'm a principal in a short-term management company, which we take very much pride in managing our guests and our properties. We have all local people working with us that grew up here. We take considerable time, and a person in our property has the on-call phone. But there still could be a chance that they didn't answer that phone 1 or 2 times. And what happens? That property might get penalized. The properties each have a building permit, a business license. So that permit would be going towards that property. So are we looking at that property getting penalized or the management company? We've had instance also that you call the sheriff's department and they don't even respond within an hour. I believe an hour is putting a little bit too much constraint on reasonably responding to any problems. I just wanted you guys to take that into consideration if you can. And also, if we all agree that there should be some ordinance and some balance. But we need to, I think, really work on this and not push it through. We need to come up with something that will last and not something that has to be changed every 6 months, every year, moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Hi, Robert Rainey, resident since '81. I have Remax Silent Realty, and we do listing and sales, don't do rentals. I took some notes, what you were proposing to move forward, and I think we're all on the same page as far as keeping Hilton Head being nice and clean and a good place, safe place to be. A couple things concern me. The 2 strikes, you're out. What's to stop a neighbor living here that just doesn't like rentals? And we're over here, we have a house that has rentals. That's by right allowed to do this. They pick up the phone and call. They're the nuisance. Okay? So that concerns me of being accused of something you're not doing because they just don't like it and they know the rules. And so 2 strikes, you're out. And then what if you do rent? We can't. I said we, I'm not a rental company. But the rental companies, they can't pick and choose who they can rent to. They answer a reservation, they put a credit card down, they show up, they rent the house. Here's the rules. So what if you have an unruly guest? Does that property owner or company get in trouble? Or do they get that call, they answer in an hour or whatever's fair, and they address that problem, they remove those people? Do they still get that strike? So moving forward, imposing these laws, which I call restrictions and laws, which are good, but they also can hurt. So please think about any and all, when you play a game, if you know all the rules, it's easy to figure it out. Like I play poker. If there's a little bit of money in the pot and something comes up, it's not a big deal. When there's a lot of money in the pot, I believe what I believe and you believe what you believe. So how do we figure it out? I think when you say that you get, if you do take the license, say this house is a nuisance, and I'm sure there are some places that continually have real issues and real problems. Probably not many, or we wouldn't be in business this long. So a few, which is probably a big number because we have a lot of rentals every week, times 8,000 or times 10, whatever it is. That's a lot. So if we do have hundreds of complaints, it's a small number in the big picture. However, it's not if you're that neighbor, I understand. So we have to try to work together, be realistic and be fair. That's all I'm asking moving forward, to please try to have a think tank of scenarios of what can happen. And if this house is a problem, does that house get that stamp of never getting an approval? Or does that homeowner? Or do you have to change rental companies? Or do I just say, cool, I move it to another LLC, I go ahead and get a license, and boom, I'm back in business? What about if you say this, you're in trouble, you're a nuisance? What about the guests and the reservations that are already on hand for next week and the next week? What do you do about that? Because the Rental Act says you have 90 days when property changes deeds. So just something to think about. I think I've gone over my minutes, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Yes.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul Sego, Senior Government Affairs Manager for the East Coast for Expedia Group. Vrbo is our vacation rental brand. I just want to thank you for this process. It's been one of the most open and welcoming, frankly, from our point of view that we've seen across the country. Thank you to your staff. Anne has been wonderful to work with. We've reached out to her a couple times. Thank you all for taking the time to hear from us, to hear from owners, from renters on our platform like Ms. Laura, who spoke a couple people ago. And I said this when I sort of introduced myself to you via email. Expedia Group wants to be a resource to you as you go through this process. You've been great in hearing from us, and so as this issue moves to full council, we'd still like to be a resource. As council goes to what we're calling tier 2 and those sort of bigger picture issues, still love to be a resource. So just thank you for this process, and appreciate your time.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Paul. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I am Susan Treadaway, and I work for a rental company here on the island, and we manage 120 properties. I also live in North Forest Beach, and like Al Brown, I've lived here all my life. So I love this place. And what you said about, God, I don't know why I'm crying. What you said about the neighbors being miserable, I think that person's just a miserable person. I mean, I understand that they want peace of mind and they want to live in the area that they thought they were moving into. But, you know, I live in North Forest Beach. I have amazing neighbors. I love seeing the families walk to the beach and the joy that they have by being here. I've been in the rental business for 15 years. I've had five situations where I had to call a guest and tell them that they were being loud. I want to know what the main complaint is. What is the main complaint that you all have heard from the neighbors? Or is it noise? Is it basically the noise, or?
In these public comments, council doesn't respond.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, if it is, and again, I've had 5 complaints probably in 13 years, we deal with it immediately. And we call the sheriff. I mean, you know, and like Lisa said, sometimes they don't come in an hour, but I feel like you guys being involved in that is just, like Laura said, we don't need you to be involved in our unruly guest. We can handle it. We do a really good job of it, and we don't have very many of them. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, ma'am. Not space.
Hi, good morning. Kate McCullion. I'm a full-time resident here on Hilton Head, and I also work for a short-term vacation rental company for the past 12 years. So just a couple of random comments that have come to mind during this meeting is, one, we don't know how many short-term rentals there are on the island. It's clear we've thrown out 6,000, 7,000, 10,000. How many are there? And then how many properties are there on the island? I'd like to know the ratio. We talked about people moving here, not wanting to be neighbors with a short-term rental property. How many communities are there on the island that don't allow that they have the option to move to? So it's not like they don't have that option. There's so many available, condos, homes, whatever it is, they have that option. I live in a short-term rental community. I love seeing all these vacationers come, huge smiles on their faces. They love Hilton Head. I see the kids with their boogie boards, getting on like their bikes, going to the beach. It's awesome. They're so nice to be around. They're actually nicer than my neighbors who live there. Trash, I know that's a big deal. I deal with that on a daily basis from the management side of things. Are we going to be holding the trash companies responsible for not missing a pickup, which they so often do? We have to call them, they have to go back out. So we do what we can, but if we're not holding the trash company responsible, how are we supposed to do our jobs? Secondly, fire rescue, our police department. We are understaffed as is. And now you want to put more tasks on them. We call the cops if someone's complaining about noise. Sometimes they don't even show up. They say they have other things to do. The points of quiet hours between 10 and 7, I know for a fact people who are going to call at 10:01 p.m. every single time because they're unhappy that they live next to a short-term rental property that was there before they even built the house. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with these repeat complainers who at 10:01 are going to be calling because 16 people are out there enjoying dinner who are talking? So I know it's difficult. Thank you guys for your time. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
I really wasn't prepared to say anything. My name is Gina Fawcett Fardman, and I've lived here nearly 25 years, and I actually own a couple of short-term rentals, and I've managed a few rentals that I've sold in the past. I work for Remax Island Real Estate, as you can see, and I have sold quite a few properties in the short-term rental market, and my buyers are calling me consistently wanting to know what's going to happen in the short-term rental market, and I really don't have an answer for them. But I can tell you, as an owner of a couple of villas myself, if I ever have a problem, I've been there in the middle of the night. I've gotten up from a table on New Year's Eve because the cleaning people hadn't cleaned the properties. I've done whatever I can do. And I take my business seriously, and I take my clients seriously. And I think people, if you treat them the way you want to be treated, then you can be successful in this market. And then we don't need all that other kind of whatever. I just think that they keep the island beautiful, and the way that, that I saw it when I moved here, as Tamara said. And our money comes from the short-term rental market, basically, with all our restaurants and everything like that. And I understand we need some more housing. I'm just not sure what the answer is right now, and I don't think that we should move too fast with all the short-term rental companies here that has investments in what they do and what they love doing and where they love to live at. And that's just my concern, and I just hope that we can come to some conclusion without jumping to, make quick decisions.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to give everybody a chance. Yes, sir.
Good morning. I'm Tom Reed. I'm a resident. Been here since 97. Been coming here since 73 as a kid. I'm an owner, president, and broker in charge of Charter One Realty. And Ms. Becker, can you hold up that map for a second?
Two parts.
Yep. So the vast majority of that map is where people that live here full-time tend to live, okay? We have areas of the island that have historically, for as long as I've come here, been in the rental market. You brought up a concept of learned helplessness. There's also a concept in the law, I'm a former lawyer too, recovering, but there's a concept in the law called coming to the nuisance, all right? And we have plenty of areas on the island where you don't have to come to the nuisance if you don't want to be around it. You can also be in the, on the island close to the beach, in Port Royal or Leamington, and not be around it. So, so that's one idea I want to present. It feels like we're going to move towards this anyway. So, so I just want to say that you've got a 2-strike policy, 1-hour response time, and 30-day hearing process. Okay? So if you're in the middle of the summer, that could be very costly, $100,000 in lost income potentially on some of the bigger properties. And I think there needs to be a compliance element to this, something where people understand if I do this, then I've complied with this 1-hour requirement. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other public comments? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Beth Petcher, and I did grow up on the island. I've lived here for 32 years. And to Drew's point, most of the people here on the island working in the short-term rental industry do live on the island. As everybody else has said, there are certain areas of the island where you don't have to, where you can choose to move to that don't allow short-term rentals. Everybody that chooses to move to Hilton Head has the ability to look at certain areas, and we do have the benefit of having areas that are designated to not allow short-term rentals. I think everybody in our industry is agreeant that we want to have good guests. We can't always control what they'll do, but we want to present good guests to the island. We want to be good neighbors, and we want to do enough to make sure that we're acknowledging our guests and giving them that point. Several of the points in this ordinance, I think, as everybody has noted to, they still need some refinement. So trying to push something forward today for the very next town council meeting with so many holes, I think is premature. I think we really need to do more time. Even as the ordinance is set right now to not go into effect till January of 2023, that gives us more time to even tweak it more and kind of fine-tune some of these points that we all agree none of us want to deal with. They're here, but we just need to do it in the right way and not fast-track it when we're not even going to be able to enforce it this rental season as it is. So I'm asking you to please just take more time to consider some of these elements and how they can be redefined to affect us all properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Is there anybody left?
Yes.
I wasn't planning on speaking today either, but I'm Jeremy Klein. I'm an island resident. I own 6 rental properties and manage 40 for Seaside Villa Management.
Your name again, please?
Jeremy Klein.
Jeremy.
And 2 things I wanted to ask about is, one, the fee being a flat fee for $1 million homes as opposed to a $100,000 condo seems a little bit unbalanced to me. We're going to be doing this at business license time anyway, so is there a way that we could put that on revenue basis? Because you're submitting what your revenue is for your business license, you can do it at the same time and make it more equitable to people who own cheaper properties. And my second thing is that there's language in, and I don't know if you want to bring it up, but in what's a nuisance as it says offends, something that offends. And a real short example is I got a nasty phone call from a lady about an offensive flag hanging on the beach. I went down there expecting a Confederate flag or a Nazi flag, and they were hanging a Trump flag. What's offensive to one might not be offensive to another. So I just thought that language was a little vague in there and might need some tweaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Yes, ma'am, please step forward.
Hi, say good morning, but it's not quite, right? I'm Beverly Serrell, and I have been a vacationer since 1970. Moved to the island in 2003, and I also am a Sea Pines resident and own a real estate brokerage and vacation rental company, kind of a boutique company. We take care of 40 properties. I would like to say that I'm not anti-ordinance. As a matter of fact, I think that people really crave order and structure, and that makes everybody feel comfortable as long as there's education and communication and everybody knows and understands what all those guidelines or rules are, how they'll be enforced, what the penalties are. And that kind of brings me to my concern about this today, is that I feel like even though there's been obviously a tremendous amount of work has gone into this, and what a gargantuan task, and kudos to everyone who really has worked so hard on it. But I'd like to see, before it goes farther, that it be a little more buttoned up, things be explained, the differences in violations and citations, permits and licenses, and who's responsible for what, and how things are going to be addressed and enforced and penalized. That would be my request. I echo everybody's sentiments here, some really great comments. And I just would like to leave you all with the fact that the vacation rental business is really hard. It's a really hard business. It's different people. It's lots of owners. It's guests every week, or 4 nights or 5 nights. It's depending on a slew of people to prepare the houses, from housekeeping, pool techs, HVAC, plumbers. We need people in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, and it's really amazing sometimes, I think, that it works as well as it does. You know, that we keep all of these balls in the air and keep people coming back, and things aren't honestly worse. I think it's really important too, as we go forward. We're really fortunate here to have a lot of really good local people who are running our businesses. So my plea to the council would be that we're here to help you. If you all will help us with an ordinance that makes sense and is objective as possible rather than subjective, we can all continue to make this place even better for everyone. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Beverly. Does anybody else want to speak? Yeah, and we're not going to go around a second time. As chairman, I'm going to make a couple of comments, because this isn't my first rodeo. I'll use the town's turtle ordinance as an example. There were some very strident residents who were saying, this doesn't have to be rushed, be more specific. And it's too subjective. And I'm not throwing darts back at people who use those words, but I'm just giving you a perspective that we who sit on council have to juggle a lot of different balls at the same time. And it's really interesting. What's a powerful commentary are those of you who stood up and said, I live on this island, I operate a rental management company, and I don't have a problem. And we understand that, but there are others who don't. And they're creating problems for this community. So the question becomes, okay, how do you write an ordinance that tries to get to where you want to go, isn't penal, raises standards, and it comes down to common sense discretion at the time of enforcement. You're not going to get penalized when something happens and it was out of your control. It's a question of discretion and common sense at the time of enforcement. And now, I think you'll leave this room saying, I don't trust that. But that's essentially where we as a council end up. We can't write the words that solve all the problems 100% of the time. So there will be discretion in how the town gets involved, but we're trying to minimize that impact on those of you who are the 80% professional operators and deal with the 20% who are creating some real problems for this community. And I'm going to make a statement, and perhaps I'm incorrect, but I'm suspicious that 20% is made up by owners who do not live on this island, do not have the core values of this island in the forefront. And so we will discover that as we move forward, as we get more information. But I think we are at a point today where we need to take a vote. Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman,
Town
can I
Yes,
make
you
one
may.
point of clarification? If you vote to move this forward, it will actually be on the agenda for the meeting of the 19th, not the 5th, meaning not the next succeeding meeting, but the one following that.
That's good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Krista, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I do.
I
And
was hoping nobody would.
I think Councilwoman Becker wants to say something also, but,
I was wait till I was going to vote, I was going to enter.
okay, all right. Councilman Stanford's motion included opportunity for us to make changes at the council level, okay? But I just want to make sure, I know we've given staff a lot, okay? But there were a few comments that were made that triggered some more thoughts with me. I just want to pull these out so that staff.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay, no, I'm not going to take me that long. I think the comments about the requirements for affidavit versus truly being responsible, I think that's valid. That's something we really need to understand when we get to the entire council. And I agree with you, Councilman Ames, that absent the mayor, Councilman Harkins, and Councilman Lennox not being a part of the deliberation is worthy enough for me to move forward because I want to hear their thoughts as well, okay? The liability concern with permitting for, safety and not having the means to check behind, I think that is, I'm for one concerned about the amount of money it's going to take to do that, but it is a concern, okay? And the timeshare piece, I'm not quite clear on that either. I think that needs to be teased out a bit so that we have a better understanding. So those are the things that I wrote that I think make sure staff heard and will respond when we get to first reading. So, okay.
Ms. Becker, 3 minutes.
We'll say 10 minutes for council, but that's okay. It won't take me that long. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for their comments. I know they're thoughtful. I know that the intention behind it is to help produce a better product, not just here as an ordinance, but in terms of what Hilton Head offers, both our visitors and our residents. I agree, David, about your comment that you took a risk in making. I would venture to say that there is a high probability that most of the issues come from owners who never have that foot on the ground on Hilton Head Island, but own perhaps not just one, but many properties on the island and don't really have their heart and soul invested here. And that makes a big difference. So those of you who are in the room who are residents, I'm so grateful to see you, and I do appreciate the fact that these issues impact you as well. I think that sometimes, perhaps, though, that you may not hear about the issues that we do, because residents are very kind on Hilton Head. Our friend from VRBO mentioned how thoughtful and kind and welcoming we are here. We are. This is a unique place. I'm not saying that others aren't kind and considerate, but Hilton Head is a unique paradise that we do not want to disturb. And my concern is that by having these types of issues that we all hear about, we are disturbing the future of our island. We are impacted by that third dimension where our capacity hasn't been discussed. The occupancy, which I agree, frankly, ought to be the first condition that we put on our agenda to attain understanding of, because from that, I believe a lot of our problems come. So another reason in my mind, another reason in my mind to take some time to look and respect that occupancy, that capacity issue that we're confronted with. Having said that, I also am going to say, I, as a town council member, represent the island residents, and yes, there are lots of places you can move to on the island. And every one of them should be peaceful and should allow quality of life that Hilton Head is known for, and for our investments in our lives, our families' lives, and the future generations to come after us to be equally as peaceful. And we ought not be relegated to some other area in favor of just those who are coming here to put money in their pocket and leave us behind. So.
I just want to say this has not been rushed. We've been working at this for a long time. There has been input from interest groups, from property owners. This is our second full meeting discussing just this ordinance. It is not being rushed. We need to make a decision, and I'm ready to see us move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, to call the roll, please.
Mr. Brown?
Support the motion.
Mrs. Becker?
No.
Mr. Stanford?
For the motion.
Mr. Ames?
For the motion, passes
Motion
3-1.
carries.
Thank you. All right, let's take 5 minutes, and then we'll set up for the second half of this. Can I bring the meeting back to order, please? I have a 1 o'clock luncheon meeting, but
I'll be brief.
Okay, go ahead, Ann.
Thank you. Okay. We had 2 recommendations for you today, and this is the second recommendation, that the committee support the preliminary framework for the examination of high occupancy short-term rentals and high floor area ratio single-family homes. On March 9th, I presented to you a list of issues for further consideration by the committee. As I mentioned, the ordinance is part of the initiative. This is the rest of the initiative. You can see here the list of concerns that were expressed. I do want to note that many hotels, I think, are more accurately described as high occupancy short-term rentals, so we will use that term moving forward. Instead of considering these issues as I presented to you on March 9th, we propose to refine the next phase of the short-term rental initiative into 2 areas of focus. The first is an examination of those high occupancy short-term rentals and single-family structures with high floor area ratios. And the second is an examination of the impacts of the increasing number of short-term rentals in the island and the implications of that trend for the future. Attachment F outlines that plan to address the first area of focus. As a note, throughout the process, staff will consult with and request input from the public, stakeholders, subject matter experts, other communities, our on-call code writing consultants, and the town attorney. This matches the language that's in Attachment F that was in your packet. The first step is to define those 2 uses, high occupancy short-term rentals and high floor area ratio single-family structures. And to examine their location and trends. And just to be clear, the high floor area ratio single-family structures refers to the ratio between the amount of built area of a structure and the size of the lot that it's on. So a lot of structure on a little lot, if you want to think of it that way. So we want to define those 2 terms for us. We'll survey the occupancies of short-term rentals in the island. We have the benefit of AirDNA, and we'll have the software that we're contracting with soon to be able to examine that. We could select 1 or 2 ranges for very high occupancy and high occupancy rentals. For example, very high could be more than 30 occupants, high could be 15 to 29. And then we will survey the floor area ratios of single-family structures and select, again, 1 or 2 ranges of what we think is a high floor area ratio for examination. We'll examine their locations. We'll create maps of where those structures are located and include residential properties not used for short-term rentals and including their neighborhoods and zoning districts so we can get a good sense of where they are. And then we'll examine trends. Determine the extent to which the number and location have changed over time for each of those 2 types of structures. And then we'll analyze the impacts and effects of those 2 uses on the island, both positive and negative. We'll collect relevant available data on those impacts and effects and determine if the magnitude of those effects warrants additional policy considerations, such as enacting standards and regulations. If additional policy considerations are warranted, we would review those potential standards and regulations, starting by looking at other communities or ordinances. We're pretty familiar at this point with what other communities are doing, having done quite a bit of research for the first phase. We'll bring that information to you. We'll develop and present to you a list of potential standards and regulations and include the costs and benefits for all parties involved, and explain if or how they could be implemented while considering property rights and the existing high occupancy short-term rental uses and high floor area ratio single-family structures. So that is the second recommendation. Committee support will allow staff to execute the preliminary framework and be prepared to deliver results in the coming months.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Glenn, your thoughts?
I think you're going in the right direction. Excuse me, I think you're going in the right direction. Once we get by this first step, that is the enactment of the short-term rental ordinance, as it may finally come out from the town council. And I support the idea of evaluating and truly understanding these high occupancy properties and how they're impacting not only the neighbors around those, but also the broader island and the character of the island. So I support these completely. Thank you.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm ready to move forward on this. This, to some degree, starts to focus a little bit deeper on the imbalance, so to speak, okay? Particularly since we're looking at the entire island and how some neighborhoods have transformed. I go back to the piece of how we're going to not only stop this so that the imbalance doesn't continue, but also move towards a balance that we all agree on, okay? And I'm not sure that that's, let's say, spelled out here, but I think as part of this process, that needs to be a part of the conversation. So I support us diving in and having this discussion at this level.
Thank you.
So as I said previously, this, I believe, probably should have come first. And because it didn't, there are a lot of the issues that would have been able to be teased out from this that we could more appropriately, is a bad word, but that we could address in a better way. I see in this a lot of time and research, and from someone who loves nothing more than to research, who could go into a library at 8 a.m. and not come out until 8 p.m. Or later and not even realize that the day had gone, because it's the most exciting thing to go from one to another and to get to the original source and to analyze the data. A lot of this leads me to wonder where this will lead, because as much as I hate to admit it, sometimes my love for research and the details also stands in the way of making any real progress. And so as I look at this, that's some of what I see. And then I see judgment calls in terms of if it should be necessary or warrant. And I'm wondering who's making those judgments along the way. Is council making that? Is committee making that? Is staff making those decisions? And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes, ma'am. The intention is that the committee and town council would direct staff's work. So you would make that decision if additional policies are warranted.
So as that report comes forward, filled with that research and information, we will sit in committee and decide whether or not it's worth moving forward on. Is that correct? Okay. Well, certainly I think it's necessary. And I look forward to hearing how you enjoy your research.
And I think your two targets are on target. I think that the issue of high occupancy, short-term rentals, and single-family structures with high floor areas are really at the crux of one of the highest, I was going to use the word inflammation points, the places that we hear the most complaints. So I think that getting a hold of that makes a lot of sense. And then secondly, understanding the impacts of an increasing number of short-term rentals is important, because there may be anecdotal evidence. There may be conclusions that we make based on intuition, but we don't have the information yet. Nor have we really teased out, because we don't have the data, those real impacts. So I think you're on target for both of these, and I also am positive about the work process that you've outlined. So I'm ready to move forward on this if there is a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the Public Planning Committee support the preliminary framework for the examination of high occupancy short-term rentals and high floor area ratio single-family homes.
Do you want to make a motion on the second portion of that at the same time?
That wasn't both.
Examination of the impacts of increasing number of short-term rentals on the island and implication of the trend.
I'll accept that amendment.
Okay. All right, is there a second? Thank you, Tammy. Any comments from the public who is still here? And congratulations. Krista, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
For the motion.
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All those in signify by raising your right hand. Thank you very much. And thanks again, public, for being patient and staying.